All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. Today, we are diving into the life and career of John Prine, who's one of my favorite songwriters ever, so stick around. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot tell you how excited I am for the Kennedy Meadows Music Festival, which is coming up August 22nd to 24th. So I'll be the MC this year, so I'll be there all weekend long, and I'm playing, it sounds like on Saturday, and last year was the first Kennedy Meadows Music Festival, and it was an absolute blast. We had Dave Stamey is going to be there again this year. We had Dallas Burrows last year. Dallas Burrows, that show was amazing last year, and he's coming again this year. Ben Haggard is headlining. Chad Bushnell is going to be there. It's going to be an absolute party, and I can't tell you how stoked I am. And now is the time to get your tickets. So if you've been thinking about doing it, now is the time. And I've got a promo code for you guys. The promo code is GeorgeCroftKM at checkout here to get your tickets for the Kennedy Meadows Music Festival. So come on out. They've got there's campsites available. There's RV campsites. There's tent campsites. I think the cabins are sold out right this second, but there's first come first serve camping in the campgrounds below in the Forest Service campgrounds. It's going to be an awesome weekend full of fun and just fantastic performances. So come on out, get your tickets while you can. We are also brought to you by Tyler & Co. Marketing, providing top-notch photography and videography services to Northern California. Tyler & Co. is your one-stop shop for social media content, product videos, commercials, promotional videos, and best of all, weddings and events. I dare you to take a quick scroll down their Instagram page at Tyler&Co_marketing and tell me it doesn't look like a Hollywood production. If you want people to ask you who the executive producer of your wedding was, call Tyler & Co. If you want it to look like you got paid just to be in your wedding photos, call Tyler & Co. If you want the video of your first dance to look like it qualified you for the Screen Actors Guild, call Tyler & Co. And best of all, your future father-in-law is going to forgive you for everything. Everything. When he finds out how much money you're saving him on this wedding by using Tyler & Co. Marketing to capture your big day. So visit tylerandcofilms.com for all your photography needs. That's tylerandcofilms.com. Ladies and gentlemen, I have some big news coming up here. So I have started an Indiegogo campaign to produce and launch my next single called To Be Enough. And I'm very passionate about this project. It's one of my favorite songs I've ever written. And I'm going to give it 100% effort here to get this thing professionally done, released, and promoted across all the different social media platforms and everything else. Kind of put all my eggs in this basket for now and see how far I can take it. But for that to work, I need public support, and that can be found on my Indiegogo page, which can be found on my Linktree, which is through either my TikTok or Instagram account. If you go to my links, my Indiegogo campaign is the top one, and I would love and appreciate any support that you guys feel like giving, and we're going to try to make a real go of this thing. So please, if you don't mind, check that out, and hopefully I'll see you soon. So John Prine is one of these characters who, kind of in contrast to some of our other episodes we've done, he doesn't seem to have very much drama going on in his life and career, which is kind of refreshing. Like, there's no big crash and burn. There's no, kind of real tragedy in the mix. He seems to have just been a good dude who could write the heck out of a song and then kept catching lucky breaks and kind of, navigates his life with this, like, can-do positive attitude for the most part, and in the process has a wildly like you cannot exaggerate the impact that he had on kind of Americana music in general. We're talking like cross country and pop and rock, like all of them. Like his writing style dips into all these other genres, and he's credited by many other artists as being an inspiration. So his life starts out, he's born in 1946 in Maywood, Illinois. And he grows up just, same kind of start as a bunch of these guys. He grows up just listening to the radio and kind of idolizing, Hank Williams and the Carter family, and kind of, because if he's born in 1946, that makes him, 12 years old when Hank Williams dies, I think, because I think that was 1953, if that, or no, so was it 53 or 58 that Williams died? I don't know. My brain will get that right later. But anyway, so he's like a young kid when Hank Williams dies. And but he grows up with that influence. And actually later he kind of does a callback to Hank Williams in a song that becomes famous later. But anyway, so he grows up kind of in the suburbs of Chicago, and he pretty early on develops an interest in guitar, and he's kind of writing his own little poems and songs and stuff. And so his childhood seems to have gone by, with relative happiness. I mean, he does a lot of, his parents were from Muhlenberg County, Kentucky, which is now, kind of famous, especially in music circles. Like, the amount of musically inclined people that have come out of that part of Kentucky is crazy. So that's John Prine's parents. John Prine never actually lived in Muhlenberg County, even though he writes a song about it. But he spent his whole adult life, in and around, or at least not his whole adult life, but the early part of his adult life in and around Chicago. And he ends up becoming a mailman. Like, that's kind of his first big job, like, out of high school. And that's in the early 1960s. And he talks about that kind of with, like, a fond memory. He liked driving around. He liked his mail route. And he, like, he jokes about that there were certain dogs in the neighborhood that just had it out for him, because I guess at the time, Chicago did not have a very good handle, and the surrounding areas didn't have a very good handle on, like, wild and unneutered dogs that were running around. So there's just, like, packs of dogs that would just terrorize all the mailmen. And John Prine talks about kind of dealing with some of that stuff. And somewhere in here, he meets a guy named Steve Goodman, and they kind of become buddies, through just playing, like, little local music, gigs around town. And they pal up pretty quick. And Steve Goodman had been, like, John Prine would later describe him as being, like, the best fan he ever had, because Steve Goodman would charge so hard for John Prine and just get him in front of people, make introductions later. Like, he was just a workhorse for John Prine's career, just because he believed in him and he loved his music. And but then, so in 1968, in kind of one of the first kind of, like, funny turns of events in the story here, the not funny part is John Prine gets drafted. So this is, mid-Vietnam War. John Prine gets drafted. I think he's 24 years old at the time. And he goes in to take the aptitude test to, like, figure out what his job in the military is going to be. And he says he just, like, put random, he had no desire to be there. He just, like, puts random marks down. He just flies through the page. He wants nothing to do with this process. Submits his test. He doesn't really care where he's going. He's kind of resigned to this thing. He accidentally scored really high on mechanical, like, whatever the mechanical side of the aptitude test was. So they end up sending him to Germany, which he did not expect. And they put him, like, in charge of a motor pool, like, pretty quickly. Like, so kind of cut to, gets drafted, accidentally scores really well. Cut to, he's in Germany in charge of this motor pool. And he tells, like, a kind of another funny story in there is, like, one day they realized they had an extra bulldozer, which in the Army, apparently at the time, having an extra one is just as bad as missing one. So they just used the other bulldozers and they buried the extra one. And that's, like, how they got away with the paperwork. So it's, we have the correct number of bulldozers here. Like, that's got John Prine's attitude all over it. Like, that seems like something he would do. And anyway, so he does his, time in the Army, and he gets out in 1970. And he just comes home and goes right back to his job at the post office. He's not, he kind of seems to pick his life right back up where he left off. He gets married in here early too. But and this is the phase of time where he's really kind of leaning into his songwriting. So he tells, a lot of the songs that John Prine is still known for to this day, he wrote in this span of time. Like, this while he was a mailman walking around the suburbs of Chicago. And so, but he's still got this Steve Goodman friend who's still there. And while John was away, Steve Goodman is still working the music scene, and he kind of made some connections of his own. Well, this is where, and then somewhere in here too, there was also, there was a story of how John Prine was at an open mic night. Like he had written all these songs, but he wasn't confident in his voice or ability to perform. And, because John Prine's songs are, from a guitar standpoint, notoriously simple. Like he's just got a 3-chord guy most of the time, and he's just got a certain finger picking style. And then he writes lyrics that are just nothing but the truth, basically. His ability to tell a story in very few words is kind of what makes people gravitate towards him, I think. And so he'd been doing that. He'd been writing these songs just while he's on his mail route, sitting in his mail truck or in these big, mailbox lockers and stuff. He'd sit in there on his lunch break and just write songs. And so by 1971, he's got some really good stuff on his hands, but he doesn't really know it yet until one day at an open mic, he's like grumbling about how bad the talent is. And somebody kind of is like, well, then you go do it. And he's like, sure. And so he gets up, plays his songs, and like he talks about how there was he played a couple of songs and then it was crickets and nobody said anything. And then like a delayed reaction, the crowd kind of really gets after it, and all of a sudden he's getting all this applause, and it kind of caught him off guard. And that's sort of the beginning of his road upward. He starts, by the end of 1971 here, he was making enough money playing gigs at that point. So he's still working at the post office, and he's playing gigs at night. And he gets a regular spot. I think he was playing 3 nights a week. It was like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And he was making more money doing that than he was walking around out in the weather. So he quits his job at the post office. And he jokes about like he could have done both, and maybe most people would have. But when he was making enough money, he decided he could kind of keep his same expenses the way they were. He just quit that job and slept more, was his, kind of attitude about it. So John Prine's out here playing this regular 3-day-a-week gig that's keeping him, pretty well paid. And he's playing at other spots around town. And this is where Steve Goodman somehow, I don't fully understand this connection yet, but Steve Goodman had a connection to Chris Christopherson, who we did a whole episode about. And somehow Steve Goodman convinces Chris Christopherson to come see John Prine. And he kind of drags him into this show where the show was already over. Like the chairs were getting put up on tables, everything's kind of winding down. And Chris Christopherson talked about it like, yeah, I felt bad for the kid. We just walked in there and like not demanded, but like walked in there like, hey, like play more for us, like at the end of his show. So John Prine proceeds to play a string of songs for Chris Christopherson that would become his career hits. It was like Sam Stone, Paradise, and a couple others that are, that he's known for that my eyes aren't going to find right this second. But it was enough. It impacted Chris Christopherson, just the songwriting quality. And this is Chris Christopherson, the guy that we talked about who had quit his life as a Rhodes Scholar to come write songs. So this dude has a master's degree in English, and his thing that drew him to John Prine was the writing. It's not John Prine's voice. Even now, if you go back and listen to John Prine sing, John Prine is never going to be like a vocal icon. He's a writing icon. Full send. And like I said, and it was enough that Chris Christopherson sees that immediately and starts working to get him signed at a record label. And that kind of is obviously that launches John Prine, on the road to the music career. And so he's doing Christopherson takes him on the road. So he's opening for him, at like coliseums and stuff around the country. He opens for a few other people here. Let's see. It's like Arlo Guthrie was another one. Yeah. So, it was Arlo Guthrie, Chris Christopherson. He gets married in here. This is where he gets married to Ann Carroll Though I don't know how to say that last name. Her maiden name is like Menelask or Menelaskino or something. I don't know how you say that. But anyway, he gets married to his first wife somewhere in here. And so things start to take off. Now, this is where I think it's kind of like you can go find the story of John Prine's life around. He has done lots of interviews. He's done, he died in 2020. And before that, he was online all the time. He's doing interviews. He's talking to people. He's performing shows. So there's a wealth of information out there. But I kind of wanted to zoom in on his impact on other people that are working today and kind of why, and sort of like what some of his song lines that jump out and grab people. Because, the highlights sort of in his career, he wrote Angel from Montgomery, which Bonnie Raitt did and made famous. But when he wrote that song, it was just him and a friend were trying to do a co-writing session, and his buddy was like, oh, we should write a song about an unhappy middle-aged, wife. And, but then the guy said something that kind of irritated John, and he was like, nah, I don't want to do that, So then whatever the disagreement was, it was about that guy's idea of how he wanted to approach it, because John Prine goes home and writes Angel from Montgomery, which is, he described the inspiration as he had this visualization of a middle-aged woman in an unhappy marriage washing dishes with soap on her hands, and she just kind of sets it down and walks away from it all. But like I said, his ability to paint these pictures is kind of what everybody loves about this guy. The line from Angel from Montgomery is, if dreams were thunder and lightning was desire, this old house would have burned down a long time ago. It's there are people who will spend their whole lives banging their head against songwriting and never come up with a line like that. And he just came up, he had stuff like that just falling out of him all the time. Sam Stone, the hook for Sam Stone is, there's a hole in daddy's arm where all the money goes, and Jesus Christ died for nothing, I suppose. Come on, dude. That's if you're not just tearing at people's heartstrings immediately with that line, And then he did other funny stuff too. The song In Spite of Ourselves is just a hilarious, conversation basically between this goofy married couple. And so his writing style was simultaneously goofy and funny and simple, but also he could just get to the heart of a problem immediately, just with very, very, very few words. And anyway, so but a lot of those songs he kind of started his career off with. Sam Stone was already written by the time Christopherson found him. Paradise was already written. In Spite of Ourselves wasn't written, but there's a whole bunch of them here. A little funny side story here. At one point, him and Steve Goodman are just hanging out in Steve's apartment trying to write songs. And he looks over Steve Goodman's shoulder and he sees written down on the page the first line. It was sometimes it seems so useless to remain. And John Prine jumps up on the bed goofing around with a guitar, and in a exaggerated southern accent is like, you never even call me by my name, just trying to make Steve Goodman laugh. But it worked, and then they kind of it kind of clicked and they finished the song. And then John Prine was being so sarcastic about it that he didn't even want his name on the song when Steve Goodman finished it. He was just it's kind of, he's we're kind of being facetious and making fun of country music. I don't want to put my name on that. You can have it, Steve. But that song goes on to hit number 1, and John Prine's not credited as a writer. but it becomes a classic. And anyway, and there's just funny stories like that all over his career of people he's bumped into and, impacts that he's had. I remember when I became aware of John Prine. So first of all, my parents had a family band, or my parents were in a band, early on. And I remember my mom singing Angel from Montgomery, and I knew that it was written by a guy named John Prine, but I didn't know what that meant. And I remember when I was in high school, I think, John Prine went on the Colbert Report, or Rapport, I guess. Like, you know, it was back when Stephen Colbert was kind of in the heyday of that show, that was a fun show to watch. And I remember, and it was like a political show. It wasn't a music show. But he would have these musical guests on sometimes, and John Prine comes walking out on the stage, and Colbert is just completely fangirling over John Prine. And that kind of sparked my interest more in this whole thing. It was funny, when I was doing research for this episode, and I listened to, there's a book out there, which the title of it I will find and say. The opening, like in the intro to the book on John Prine, the author, I think his last name was Huffman, tells the story of watching that exact same episode of the Colbert Report that I remember watching as a kid. So I'm sitting there like hearing this and having these images flood back to my mind and thinking like, man, I was apparently not the only person that impacted, because I remembered that very clearly. And because he came on and he played How Lucky Can One Man Get? And I remember after I heard that on that show, I listened to that song on repeat for weeks, and and irritated everybody else around me. But anyway, so then John Prine goes on, and by that time in his career, he had kind of moved into a phase where he is really mentoring other songwriters and singers coming up. And lots of people, like I said, credit him directly with their, with having inspired them. Most notably would be people like Jason Isbell and, Brandi Carlile, Casey Musgraves. And probably, at least to me, one of the more notable ones is Sturgill Simpson. And because Sturgill Simpson and John Prine they were kind of kindred spirits there towards the end. I think they met in, 2016 or 15. And so John Prine, I'm kind of jumping around in the story a little bit here, but John Prine and Steve Goodman, through their career of writing songs and kind of making some hits, but really their discography sort of floats unnoticed on the sales front, but then is later, regarded as masterpieces. But as far as like record sales and record companies go, they were not burning down the doors of these places, to the point where like John Prine moved record labels a few times, landing with him and Steve Goodman co-founding their own record label, which is Oh Boy Records. And there's a couple of different versions of the story of how that got its name. Sometimes he just says, he named it after a Buddy Holly song. But then the more John Prine-esque version of the story, which I've seen him say, is that, you name it Oh Boy Records so that when you have years where the company makes a bunch of money, you're like, oh boy. And when you have years where the company's not making any money, you're like, oh boy. Like it's the same reaction both directions. And so they start Oh Boy Records. And they're, so he's moved to Nashville at this point. He's kind of settling into the kind of corporate end of the work life here. And he's still touring, and he's still performing with just about everybody that he wanted to. But I really gravitated towards the story of him and Sturgill Simpson, because Sturgill was just kind of up and coming in 2015. And through kind of mutual management and some, other connections, they end up kind of sharing an office space. So because they had met, I think, playing at Austin City Limits. And John Prine, one of the first things that he had said to Sturgill Simpson was basically like words to the effect of like, don't let Nashville tell you what to sing, or like, kind of like do your own thing, you'll be okay kind of deal. And which John Prine was already Sturgill's hero at that point, and hearing that from John Prine just meant the world to him. And then they developed this relationship over the next, couple of years. And they're sharing an office now, and they're, kind of, I don't know if they ever officially collaborated, but there's plenty of stories of like Sturgill Simpson sitting at the mixing board with his earphones on, and he turns around and there's John Prine just standing behind him, kind of nodding his head like, man, sounds good, kid. Like that's, and that's, to me, that dynamic, and having like, just turn around to like one of your musical heroes is just standing behind you, like giving you a nod. Like what that must have been like for a young up and coming Sturgill Simpson. That it's just so cool to me. And it's cool that like John Prine would take that kind of time out of his day to just like go be that kind of supportive dude. And like I said, and they struck up, like their friendship deepens to the point where, in what I think is one of the coolest, crescendos to a sad story here, when John Prine dies in 2020. So he dies from COVID. And I remember when that happened, just being, he had throat cancer before, and he was, he wasn't in great health leading up to that. So as soon as I heard that John Prine had COVID, everybody was kind of like, everybody was really hoping he would make it, but it was like, man, I knew he had cancer, and I knew he'd gone through a couple of surgeries, and sure enough, he does not survive COVID. But he leaves in one of the only examples of something I can find where John is like leaving specific things to people. He gave his car, which was a Porsche 911 that was like John's dream car that he got. And I think he said it was one of the first, or it was like one of the first big spends he did with like, his music money, was he bought himself this Porsche. He didn't do stuff like that very often, but he buys his dream car. It was a 2008 Porsche 911. And he leaves it to Sturgill Simpson. So Sturgill, right now, has John Prine's Porsche, which I just think is like one of the coolest things ever. Like, not only did that dude get to just kind of be around him and get nods and get encouragement, he's now driving around in his car, which is just kind of like I said, it goes to show you the kind of guy John Prine was and kind of how generous he could be, and with his time and, a lot of other stuff apparently. So, but yeah, I think back all the time to John Prine songs, and like if I'm sitting down trying to write a song and I'm stuck, and you're kind of, especially me, I have a tendency to overcomplicate songs sometimes, and sometimes the simple rhyme is okay, and that's John Prine's whole discography is full of just simple rhymes that just punch you in the feels. And that's an art form unto itself. And yeah, so good old John Prine. So another reason why we kind of went over this episode today is because we're going to do a bunch of other episodes where people are calling back to John Prine, and like I said, citing him as a inspiration. And so I wanted to at least give him a nod here, because I know like most of our episodes have been guys that like hit it hard and burned out and did all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, that's not John Prine. He seems to have just kind of had a smile on his face and a can-do attitude, and just kind of ran through the raindrops as far as like the rock star lifestyle could have gone for him. He just kind of kept on keeping on and put out good music and kept writing, and he was just committed to his craft, and he passed that on to the next generation of writers and singers and songwriters. And yeah, just an invaluable person for music in general. So that's John Prine. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.